VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Friends, thank you for joining us on Crosstalk. You know, we call ourselves a civilized society, and yet we are a society that continues to prey on human life in the womb. For instance, Hope Clinic in Chicago advertised, even just recently, that they perform late-term abortions up to 34 weeks. Can you grasp that? While some states are acting to protect life, there are others that are putting unborn children in the crosshairs and declaring open season on them all year long and at all stages of development. Friends, it's no scientific secret that human life begins at conception, and yet somehow we wave this magic wand and say, well, it's okay up to a certain point. We are killing the future generations of our country, and where is this going to lead? Well, because we're killing the youngest among us. It's reported that the population of older adults is increasing significantly, and as a result, this has implications on our economy, on our healthcare system, and our social services. Well, friends, just as they are doing in some states and in a number of countries, don't think our aging population is not going to be targeted as well. You know, we treat human life as being disposable. No wonder why we see the growing horrendous violence in our society today. It really starts with the horrendous violence in the womb. Joining me to discuss this and related issues, we welcome back Reverend Jim Harden, who is president and CEO of CompassCare Pregnancy Services in New York. Theirs is one of the many centers that were targeted with criminal activity, including firebombs, vandalism, and threats. Reverend Harden, thank you for joining us here today on Crosstalk.
It's always a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me, Jim.
You know, Brother Jim, we've got a number of concerns to share today, as well as some actions taken to advance life. But how tragic, though, to see a business like Hope Clinic proudly advertising the killing of babies up to 34 weeks.
Yeah, it is gut-wrenching to realize that we're living in such a barbaric culture that people openly and brazenly advertise and celebrate the destruction and the destruction of innocent human life at its weakest and most vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's the point, we should be protecting the weakest and most vulnerable. You know, they're totally ignoring the reality, as you just described, of the sacrosanct nature of humanity. There's only two things in this world, I say this a lot, but there's only two things in the world that are sacred. It's God and people. And when we lose sight of those two things, we start down the road of using medical technology and medical knowledge for the purposes of destroying that which matters most.
Yeah.
And then we say then we call it a right, then we call it choice, then we euphemize it.
You know, just last week, the liberal majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court determined that our 1849 law banning abortion it doesn't really ban abortion. It's not effective. They reasoned that prior to the Dobbs decision being released during the years of Roe, that the Wisconsin legislature took other steps to limit abortion, like at 20 weeks and parental consent and all these other matters. And therefore, the 1849 law was superseded by these newer state laws regulating abortion. Jim, the legislature acted during the Roe decision because of Roe. And everybody knew that if Roe fell, that the 1849 law would stand. That's why they tried so desperately to rid our state of that law prior to the Dobbs decision. They honored it as soon as Dobbs was released, but somehow Planned Parenthood just decided we're going to start up again. The governors, applauded them. The attorney general would not stand in their way, and now the Supreme Court, liberal majority now, due to one campaigning that they would, they stood up for a woman's so-called right to choose. And now we have the 1849 law that banned abortion struck down.
Yeah, it's an activist judiciary undermining the rule of law and the separation of powers. This is a law that was duly enacted by the legislature, signed into law by the governor, and the attorney general is the chief law enforcement officer and is bound, duty-bound, oath-bound to enforce it. And to have the judiciary just come along and say, oh, this law is presumed to be overturned by the legislature. They're presuming to speak on behalf of the legislature, and the governor comes along and applauds it. Mm-hmm. They're It's a raw, just a raw judicial act of power. And the problem is that this law, as far as I understand it, based on information that I read from the Thomas More Society, the public interest law firm down in Chicago, they said that this law, in fact, had been acted upon and presumed to be law by the legislature itself, with several, at least 2 or 3 different modifications of the law in the recent years, which means that the judiciary cannot presume the law was not active or presumed to be active. In fact, as you just described, off air, there was a woman that was on her way to get an abortion the day Roe versus Wade was overturned.
Yes.
In Wisconsin, and they had to call her that day and say you have to go somewhere else because it's illegal here, and she was referred down to Chicago or down to Illinois, and thankfully she had decided to have her baby. But this is the kind of thing that is so insidious, and now you've got they want to take it a step further in Wisconsin and modify, have the judiciary do another raw act of power and modify the Constitution and presume upon the Constitution of Wisconsin a right to abortion, which is another it boggles the mind. The role of government is to protect all people equally without partiality. And for the government to come along and disqualify an entire category of human being from protection of the law is the quintessence of evil. I don't even know if you can say it that way. It's certainly a slap in the face of equality.
And what's so interesting, too, I think someone had pointed out, one of the justices so far, that 1849 law did not use the exact word abortion. No, they described what it was, the taking of life and so forth. But our Wisconsin Constitution doesn't say abortion either.
Well, neither does the Bible.
Right.
But the principle remains. The principle of protecting all people, especially the weak and vulnerable, is the primary presumption in the concept of the rule of law. We are all equal under the law, irrespective of power, money, prestige, position. It doesn't matter. Whether you're in the womb or out of the womb, whether you're sick and dying, whether you're disabled or a fully able-bodied genius, it doesn't matter. We are all equal not because the government says so, but because God says so. Mm-hmm. We are made in His image and therefore inherently valuable. We get our dignity from God, not government. And therein lies the rub. It's the fundamental presupposition that's being altered about the nature of what government is and supposed to do in the role of human affairs.
Let's hit another issue, and while we're on this topic, a tragic story out of South Korea. An abortionist facing murder charges after allegedly performing an abortion on a 36-week pregnant woman resulted in the baby being born alive, then left to die unattended, and just left to die. I mean, similar to what the former governor of Virginia was promoting as well. Your comments on this story?
Well, again, this is the modern West, and Asia is following suit. Part of the problem with South Korea is that while they don't have, laws regulating or outlawing abortion because they say it's probably unconstitutional, this is a big gray area. But here's the problem: you've got ostensibly a physician who is induced labor. Okay, 36 weeks. I had a son that was born early preterm at 32 weeks. Okay, we took him home 2 days later. Think about that.
Yeah,
we took him home 2 days later. And within 2 weeks, I mean, he was a good eater, so he grew pretty fast. But nevertheless, think about this baby was full term. This baby was full term. He had to induce labor to get this baby out, and then he let this baby die of exposure after the baby was born. So as you just described, though, the hardness of heart, the callousness, the seared conscience that is required in order to leave an innocent child to die. It boggles the mind. And I'm saying that this is how far culture has gone. Mm-hmm. When you extract God from the formula of existence and the purpose of mankind, it's a slippery slope. Who gets to decide who lives and who dies? That's raw power. And that's exactly what was happening with his abortionist. He was engaging in an act of raw power. And it should be a wake-up call to all these people, and especially the people in Hope Clinic and the neighborhood around Hope Clinic in Chicago that's doing 34-week abortions. This is no different than what happened in South Korea. No different, except they do it every day and they celebrate it.
Right.
And so women are going to be coming from all over. They're going to market this, and they're going to, encourage late-term abortion tourism in Chicago. And this is people think, well, this isn't going to affect me. Well, it will affect you, because if we vest the government with the power to disqualify an entire category of human being that can't defend itself or speak for itself from protection of the law, then who's next? I guarantee you will at some point in time in the future be next. Whether you're viewed by the government as a financial liability because your medical expenses are too high, or because you're depressed and your doctor says you just need to die. I mean, this is physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia. This is all sorts of insanity that's coming our way. Just a river of refuse, moral and ethical refuse, and they're gonna hide under the cover of medical care.
They are, and friends, this is why. I mean, we see this being precipitated in many doctors' offices now, where even before you have exams, they're asking about your mental health and your mental, ability, and are you depressed, and how long you've been depressed, and on this goes. And believe me, what you say or what you check in the box, that is going to be part of your permanent record. Brother Jim, I had a verse of scripture come to mind as you were talking. It says, this from Romans 1, verse 21, because when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. That's what we're seeing today, this vain imaginations, darkened hearts, and that's what is being exhibited in this war on the preborn.
Oh, yes. Speaking of scripture, I was reading yesterday, and it caught me by surprise. I don't know why, because I've read it before, but it just so happens when I was thinking about euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide, when Paul wrote his letter to his protege Timothy, the Apostle Paul, and he was saying, look, the law is a good thing, but it's used for the fact that there's lawless people. The law is not there for righteous people. And then he gave a list of lawlessness and what lawlessness might mean. But those that are lawless are rebellious, they're ungodly. I'm quoting here: sinners, for the unholy and profane, for those who kill their fathers and mothers, for murderers. And I think for those who kill their fathers and mothers, that sounds like euthanasia to me. That sounds like physician-assisted suicide to me. That sounds like, murderers sounds a lot like legalization of bad things. And they make it, one of the most insidious things that's been happening in America over the last 4 or 5, maybe 10 years is that the government is designed to make it, the government can't make people be moral, okay? But government can make it hard for bad people to do bad things. And the government can also make it easier for good people to do good things. But the insidious thing here is when the government is infiltrated by bad people, it starts to celebrate and legalize bad behavior and make it difficult, oftentimes illegal, for good people to do good things. And that's, I think, where we are. We need to be very careful right now.
Pastor Jim Harden, our guest here today on Crosstalk. And friends, a quick break. And we're going to come back. We're going to learn about some things going on in Missouri. We're also going to be taking a look at this so-called big, beautiful bill, the funding and defunding of Planned Parenthood, and the battle for life intensifies. We'll be back in a minute here on Crosstalk.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, popular creation speaker with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, is there any evidence for Atlantis?
Chris, Atlantis was the mythical city which was submerged under the ocean. People living in the city adapted and finally evolved the ability to live underwater. Of course, this myth has no basis in fact. Humans could not live underwater, even if they swam in the water for generations. Nor have archaeological remains of such a mythical city ever been found. But there may be some basis in fact. The Bible says that there was a great civilization which was totally overwhelmed by water. This was, of course, the great flood of Noah's day. I wonder if the legend of Atlantis is really a faded memory of the flood. Even more interesting is that almost every culture around the world has the legend of the flood. I think all of this goes back to Genesis for truth.
Thanks, Dr. Morris. For more information, you can find us on the web at www.icr.org.
This is Crosstalk on VCY America. Reverend Jim Harden, our guest today, President and CEO of CompassCare Pregnancy Services in New York. We'll talk more about their work and the matters going on in New York as well, but let's pick up with the situation going on in Missouri right now. Brother Harden, last Thursday afternoon, just as everybody's getting ready to celebrate Independence Day, there we have a judge striking down so many laws that did not do away with abortion entirely, but they put different laws in place that reduced the killing. And just like that, a rogue judge took action.
Yeah, this is part of the dilemma that we're facing in America is rogue activist judges. Mm-hmm. And you saw it happening, as far back as, I want to say, 2010, 11, 12, where you had California had a ballot proposition called Ballot Proposition 8, and the people of California voted down legalizing same-sex marriage. And so an activist judge stepped in and said, oh, no, the ballot initiative is void. He totally ignored and threw out the voice of the people. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. It's now known as the Obergefell decision. And legislation, again, from the bench, said that now legalized same-sex marriage throughout the entire United States. So you've got a situation where rogue judges feel it their duty to enact a form of secular fundamentalism in government policy, circumventing both the legislative and executive branches of government. And this is undermining the rule of law by way of the law. And I don't think we need to stand for this. The question that we need to, I think, be asking ourselves is, what's the path to impeachment? I think that's really the question we need to be asking right now. Mm-hmm. What's the path to impeachment for a rogue justice, whether it be at the state level or the federal level? U.S. District Court judges, for example, you had a situation where, I know we're going to talk about the One Big Beautiful Bill, but you did have a rogue justice just on Monday issue a temporary injunction, against the One Big Beautiful Bill because it did not fund Planned Parenthood. Mm-hmm. Okay? Well, so you got a justice that is forcing Congress to appropriate $800 million to an abortion business. It just happens to be their pet vice. Their pet policy vice is abortion, and they want to just insert themselves and circumvent the legislative and executive process by just a sheer force of judicial power. And they didn't even give any reason. No rationale whatsoever. Mm-hmm. No rationale. I mean, so if people think this is bona fide, they have to stop and think, well, what is our kind of governmental philosophy? Are we a rule of law government with separation of powers, or aren't we? Yeah. And if we're not, then let's just do away with elections and let's do away with representation. Let's just have one world government with one big dictator. That's what we're getting down to. And these people are rudderless, moralless justice.
Yeah, I think we call it judicial tyranny, and
yeah.
I mean, some have looked at this and said, "Hey, there's a judicial coup going on against the president right now." And I'm speaking of these lowest levels of the federal court system in particular, and it seems we're witnesses of that, a judicial coup.
I think that is exactly what it is, a judicial coup, a coup d'état. Mm-hmm. This is an infiltration, if you will, of an ideology that is being forced upon the people against specifically wherever you stand on abortion, on the debates that are pressing. This is a circumventing undermining the entire process of how America does government. And so I think we need to take a good hard look at how we execute justice when we have these people who presume to be the representatives of it, mm-hmm. Going outside the bounds of what it means to be a legal, a rule of law state.
Now, friends, keep in mind that it is the U.S. Senate that confirms judges to the bench, the federal bench, and there was a glut of judges that were passed quickly during the lame ducks, period. After President Biden had lost the election, then he surrendered it to Kamala Harris, but they went on a judicial spree, passing judicial nominations to the bench, and Chuck Schumer led that measure. And some of these ones that were put into place since Donald Trump was elected are those that are issuing these very decisions to negate actions by this administration. Let's talk about this big, beautiful bill. I mean, there's many things in this legislation. We're going to focus on life in particular, but the measure from the House pulled Medicaid funding from Planned Parenthood for 10 years. The Senate reduced that down to 1 year, and that's what ultimately passed. But give us your comments on this defunding effort through those severely limited at this point.
Well, I think this is a great step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. So, anytime you can take money away from, the abortion industry means that lives are going to be saved. So Planned Parenthood has been complaining, even before the One Big Beautiful Bill came out, that they were having to shutter some of their clinics because of a lack of funding. Despite the fact that they have $3 billion in assets and receive $800 million a year from the federal government alone, say nothing of state, funds, and grants. Mm-hmm. For example, New York State's the abortion capital of the nation, and Planned Parenthood had to close its flagship operation. That's what they said. They had to close their flagship operation in New York City, Manhattan. This is the former Margaret Sanger Memorial Planned Parenthood clinic, and they cited a lack of funding. But in 2024, not only have they gotten money from the federal government, they got $100 million earmarked by Governor Hochul in 2024. They got a part of that. They got $24 million in additional grants. They've got celebrity endorsements out the wazoo. This is an organization. There's not a money problem here in terms of the fact that they're raining cash. They get the highest Medicaid reimbursement rates of any state in the country. Okay, they don't have a money problem. I think they're using money as a cover for the serial malpractice they've committed. They're committing serial medical malpractice, and they've been in court. They've been sued. They don't want anybody to know. My sense is that they've had to shut down because they don't want anybody to know how bad they really are. And of course they're hiding under the cover of, well, we got financial problems. And by the way, the government is not obligated to fund an organization that violates the requirements of receiving the funds. For example, you can't violate civil rights if you're going to receive government funding. You can't engage in hiring malpractice and firing people without cause, like whistleblowers. You can't do that kind of stuff. And Planned Parenthood does it all the time. Okay, they are violating the law, and not just violating the law, but violating the expectations of government funding. And this is all documented. I'm not just saying this. You can go on. A lot of journalists are the New York Times printed an expose about 2 months ago on Planned Parenthood in New York. And, there's this little thing. Even if this rogue justice out of Boston, her name is talk about rogue justices, Judge Talwani out of Boston, sent this temporary injunction demanding that Congress continue to fund Planned Parenthood. Okay? Well, even if Judge Talwani was right, and she's not, to do what she did, it is still the purview of the executive to appropriate or allocate the funds appropriated by Congress, okay? Which means that he can impound those monies. He can sequester those monies if, in fact, violations are being committed by organizations or contractors of government funding. And that is exactly what he should do. It's called the Impoundment Control Act, and he should withhold that money from Planned Parenthood, even if it is somehow found by the appellate court and then the Supreme Court. It's not going to happen. But it's somehow found that by the appellate court and Supreme Court that, we should force the government to fund Planned Parenthood, which is ridiculous. Then the executive, President Trump, can simply, and it's within his purview to simply or sequester those funds indefinitely until Planned Parenthood can be fully investigated for their Medicaid fraud. That's just one example, by the way.
Wow. And as you pointed out, I mean, Planned Parenthood wasted no time filing action against this defunding. Didn't take long for that leftist judge to issue a temporary restraining order pending appeal that blocks the defunding the abortion industry. But I understand from their annual report, Planned Parenthood's annual report shows that its affiliates across the country took in right around $700 million in the government health services reimbursements and grants. It's about 9% of the revenue, and no doubt that's why they're screaming. I see that what LifeNews.com had a story. The headline: Massachusetts Planned Parenthood will lose $14 million, may have to close abortion centers. Praise the Lord. Let's shut them down.
Oh, yes. Praise the Lord. Let's shut them down. I couldn't agree more. This is not, they don't care about women. They don't care about choice. They don't care about access to medical care. They care about abortion and what abortion gives them. That's one of the reasons why Planned Parenthood spends so much money on activism, lobbying. In fact, that's one of the things that the expose at the New York Times came out with was they're raising all this money, but they don't spend it on women and women's services. They spend it on activism and politics. And so that's why, if you want to go to legal war with Planned Parenthood, you better have really deep pockets, because they are willing to spend any amount of money to maintain some sort of fundamental right or deregulation of abortion. And that's what they're doing right now. So the One Big Beautiful Bill passed on July 4th. He signed it into law. On July 7th is when this rogue justice issued this temporary injunction. This Monday. This was the first business day. What? And by the way, she had no rationale, which is one of the reasons why I think, SCOTUS is going to slap this down, and they should instantaneously. I think we should just laugh these people out of office and then find ways to impeach people like Judge Talwani. This is, again, act of raw judicial power. But not just that, but the Supreme Court already found it. They just recently ruled on a case called Medina versus Planned Parenthood in South Carolina. Remember this?
Yes, and comment. This is another SCOTUS decision that said states you can defund Planned Parenthood. I mean,
that's right.
There, in my opinion, there had to be a national movement on the state level, to take advantage of this.
Oh, without a doubt. It would save us so much money. And by the way, we're cutting our nose off to spite our face. If any politicians think that it's a good idea to destroy the next generation of citizen, they're cutting their nose off to spite their face. The next generation of voter is being destroyed, and they're promoting the destruction of the next generation of citizen. And beyond that, of course, these children that are being destroyed could grow up and get married and have more children. With where we are as a country in terms of population, you already touched on this, but our fertility rates are down below 1.6 right now, which means that we're not replacing ourselves.
Right.
You solve the border problem, and now America's population is going to plateau and start to decline. You mentioned that too. We're going to age as a population, which is what's happening. Mm-hmm. Unless we start understanding the value of marriage and childbearing again, and understanding marriage is the basic unit of society. That is one man, one woman, and their ability to raise the next generation of healthy citizen in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. We don't have a future.
Wow. Friends, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and continue on with that thought. Fertility rate of 1.6. How do we even recover from that? And friends, we're also going to get into the matter of the Johnson Amendment and what that means, and should this be a change of course in the hearts and minds of many churches? We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to Crosstalk.
Many are concerned today by a culture that has turned its back on God. Instead of providing spiritual answers, the modern-day church is nothing more than a reflection of the Church of Laodicea, a church caught up in itself with little regard to God. Available on DVD, Time Changer takes an individual from the year 1890 to the present to catch a glimpse of where society will go if only following good morals, but void of the authority of Jesus Christ.
Russell, you must listen.
It's impossible to travel through time.
But it is possible.
Good evening, Norris.
Russell, please.
Good evening.
You must see for yourself what happens in the future.
The 95-minute DVD Time Changer is available for a donation to VCY of $15, with each additional copy to the same address for a donation of just $10 more. Call 1-800-729-9829.
James Harden with us here today on Crosstalk. And friends, he is the president and CEO of CompassCare Pregnancy Services in New York. Their website, CompassCareCommunity.com. That's CompassCareCommunity.com. Brother Harden, I was just trying to soak in what you're talking about, the fertility rate. And we have such a low view of marriage today. We've distorted it. Even 10 years ago, we just had the 10th anniversary of the Obergefell decision. And friends, just a reminder, the Liberty Counsel is working on an appeal right now to that could overturn Obergefell with their client, Kimberly Davis out of Kentucky. So continue to be praying for Matt Staver and the team there. But this whole matter of the cheapening of marriage and not only that, but we are casting doubt on couples even to have children today, and children are a nuisance, and you don't want your career path to be destroyed by having children, and on that litany goes. We're headed towards self-destruction.
Yes. I was driving back from the office yesterday, and I caught a glimpse of a couple out in the front yard, and the man was on a trailer, and he was working with a strap to tie down a piece of equipment. And his wife was standing next to the trailer, and there was a little toddler out there. And she looked like she wanted to talk with her husband or help her husband. And then the toddler was toddling off somewhere, and then she changed her focus and placed her focus on the child. And instantly, the thought came to my mind. I know it's so obvious to me what's more important in that picture. The woman addressing the toddler was so much more weighty and powerful than the man tying down a piece of equipment on a trailer. He's basically trying to create a place for his family to grow into the fullness of destiny for which God has created them. And he's partnering with his wife to do that. She's doing the most important work. The most important work, the most powerful work, the most influential work that could ever be done in this world is motherhood. The hand that rocks the cradle moves the world. It's so true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what we've done in our society is that we've downplayed that and said, oh no, you've got to have a, you're just like men, women. You've got to have a career. You've got to be independent. You've got to be out there on your own. And then maybe you might have your child at one point in time. Maybe you have two children. The problem is people are getting married later. They're putting off marriage later and later. They're putting off childbearing later and later. And of course, natural fertility window is for women is between 19 and somewhere in their mid-20s, okay? So their natural fertility window starts to decline in their late 20s and into the 30s and beyond. And so if women start having children in their 30s, well, they're going to have fertility problems, and they do. And so the use of IVF is becoming more prevalent. The infertility rates of couples is just inordinately high, even if they wanted to have kids. And then, of course, they can't have as many kids because they're starting too late and that sort of thing. So there's all sorts of problems because people are not valuing marriage beyond a career. The husband and the wife are a team. The husband should do what he can to create and sustain a place where his wife can do the most powerful work that any human can do on this world, and that is help to bear and raise the next generation of healthy citizens. Yeah. There's fingerprints. This pastor friend of mine I was talking to today, he's like, I'm so grateful for my children. I'm so grateful for my wife who dedicated her life to raising them. And he was sitting around the table with them all, with their grandkids, and he said, I see her fingerprints all over you. Wow. Meaning they're doing so well because mom dedicated her life to them.
Yeah.
And it has ripple effects for generations.
I'd like to bring up another issue, and we need another hour here today, but we've had many a church and many a pastor who said, you know what, we don't get engaged in issues like this. That's political. Abortion is political, and we don't, so therefore we stay out of politics in addressing this. I'm going to have you respond to that and also address at the same time the IRS saying, hey, we're no longer going to enforce the Johnson Amendment. Now, let's see a court decision on that. We haven't seen, that happen as of yet, but they're saying we're not going to enforce the Johnson Amendment. Are we going to see a change in our churches, or is it going to continue to be status quo?
That is the million-dollar question. Sometimes, pastors who are aware of the Johnson Amendment could easily say, look, I can't talk about that here because it's too political, and we don't want to unduly, put our ministry of the church at risk, from fines or jail time from the IRS. But the Bible says, actually, Paul quoted Moses when he said, "You shall not muzzle the ox while he is threshing." Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
According to the Apostle Paul, muzzling the ox conveys the idea of stifling the moral teaching of the church with the threat of withholding a living wage from the preacher. Now, what's the problem here? The problem is the Johnson Amendment actually, restricts the church and other Christian leaders and nonprofits from speaking the truth, moral truth, in the public square as it relates to public policy or candidates running for office who have a certain set of public policies they want enacted. And so it's muzzling the ox because they're threatening to take away their money. They're threatening to take away their living wage. So that's fine if the government wants to do that. But it's still incumbent upon the Christian pastor and leader to be the watchman, irrespective of the potential ramifications, negative ramifications. Speaking out, this is, we've got to warn. This is Ezekiel talks about how the people of God, the watchmen, the leadership of the people of God are the watchmen. And we need to warn the world of wickedness and the wicked way so that we can escape it and live. That's the purpose of Christian leadership. The moral voice of America is and should be found in the pulpits in America, no matter what the law says you can and cannot say from the pulpit. And so while the Johnson Amendment does not alleviate the duties of Christian leaders, the watchmen to preach the truth from God's perspective, we have to keep warning our people and the nation so that we can avoid this moral shipwreck. Mm-hmm. It just requires the preacher to fear God more than man. And in fact, Ezekiel says, "Do not be afraid of them or dismayed before them." Why? Because they do have power to harm us. The government does have power to make our lives very difficult, miserable, even throw us in jail, as we saw with many peaceful pro-lifers under the Biden administration being thrown into federal prison. Thankfully, Trump pardoned them all. But this is nothing new. Government authorities in their day gave the apostles and other church leaders, like in Acts, strict orders not to continue teaching. I mean, you see this in Acts chapter 5.
Right.
But making America, great again, according to Trump, and from my perspective, requires a moral revival. We're seeing kind of a conservative political revival, but it's going to be short-lived unless it's attended by a spiritual one.
Right.
America has no shot at a return to greatness unless courageous men from the pulpit refuse to let the truth be silenced and say with the apostles, you know what? We must obey God rather than man.
Amen. Amen. Jim Harden with us here today on Crosstalk. Again, it's CompassCareCommunity.com. I've got more topics in minutes, but let me ask you this. I know you're watching with interest the race for mayor in New York City at this time, and there are grave implications. And by use of the word grave, I also include literal graves because of its implication on what this is going to mean for human life itself. But your comments on what we see, where we're looking at putting really a Marxist into this position of mayor, is that what the people are calling for?
Well, I hope not. And the reason I say that is because Mandami is the guy that got the majority of the
primary vote. Mm-hmm.
And so even over former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who is also running for New York mayor under the Democrat ticket. But the current mayor, Eric Adams, is going to run as an independent. But the fact that you've got a significant contingent, a contingent large enough to vote for a self-avowed communist to become the leader of the largest city in America should send shivers down everybody's spine. because this is a shot across the bow of not only the American way of life, but the American form of government. Communism is fundamentally atheistic at its heart and secular, and it's not just an opinion. Secularism, specifically anti-Christian secularism, is a core tenet to Marxism. You have to destroy any authority that takes precedent over government authority. And that means God, that means family, that means the church, right? Anything that could be seen as a competitor to the authority of government must be destroyed and must be made illegal. So you saw this happening in the French Revolution. They took over Notre Dame, and they had a atheistic feast at Notre Dame. Why? Because, it's for that reason. So Mandami, I think, is the strange thing about Mandami is he's Muslim. And I've said this very, very oftentimes over the last 3 years. Islam and communism are vying for power on the global stage right now. Yeah. And they have the same goal. The goal of Islam and the goal of communism is to destroy the nation-state system that's buttressed by the United States of America. And so once that nation-state system is destroyed, and by the way, Israel represents that in the Middle East, and so that's why they attack Israel too. Once that's destroyed, it paves the way for a global communism. But I think that communists and Islamists want to fight over who actually gets the power. And when the nation, if and when the nation-state system finally falls, God forbid. And so here we've got this strange combination of Islamicists, in a character who's also a communist.
It's the red-green axis embodied in one person.
Yeah, it is a really interesting phenomenon to see. I think that you've got a lot of communist, socialist types of thinking in New York City. I don't think you've got a lot of Islamists in terms of popularity in government in New York City. So I think he's probably trying to hide under communism until he can get elected and start to enforce more, bring more of Islamic policies to bear.
Yeah. Friends, we've got a lot here, but let's open our phone lines to give you opportunity to ask questions or make a brief comment on our topic of discussion today. As we're talking about the battle for life intensifying, our phone number to crosstalk is 1-800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. Brother Harden, we were warned that if Roe were reversed, that there would be a sharp escalation in maternal deaths. Is that happening?
No, they're claiming there's a sharp escalation in maternal deaths at the emergency rooms. But I actually predicted before Roe v. Wade was overturned that if it was overturned, chemical abortion will become the primary venue or means by which abortion takes place, and there will be, I use the phrase, miscarriage inflation in emergency rooms, because what happens is these illegal chemical abortion purveyors online send these drugs to women in the mail illegally, by the way, according to violation of state laws, violation of the Comstock Act, federal laws. And so what they do is they tell women, if you have complications, go to the emergency room and tell them you're miscarrying. And new studies have come out just recently saying that 1 in 10, an analysis of over 800,000 insurance records demonstrates that 1 in 10 women who start the chemical abortion process wind up in the emergency room, many of whom are being misclassified as miscarriages. So it's the abortion industry that's causing the problem, and they're saying, oh no, it's the laws restricting abortion that's causing the problem.
Friends, a quick break. We'll come back to your phone calls. Our number to crosstalk is 1-800-733-9829. 800-733-9829. This is Crosstalk on the VCY American Network.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewtube.com. Well, the word now is that Jeffrey Epstein did not have a client list, and apparently he did nothing wrong, and he committed suicide. Wow. That's 180 degrees from what we were being told by some of the very people who are now inside the DOJ and the FBI. My friends, I've been encouraging the listeners to my broadcast since day one of the re-election of Donald Trump to lower their expectations. America's federal government has become so corrupt and it controls so many that I believe Americans need to understand there's very little change that's going to come from Washington, D.C. I believe it must happen at a constitutional level, at the local level, at the state level, at the 10th Amendment level. Until then, I don't see much solution. We'll have some wins, but at the end of the day, no, the deep state will roll on. I'm Brandon House.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America as the battle for life intensifies. Jim Harden, our guest, president and CEO of CompassCare Pregnancy Services in New York. Their website, CompassCareCommunity.com. Let's go right to the phone lines. Mike is calling from the state of Maine. Hi, Mike. You're on the air.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you.
I was listening to your program today, and it's very interesting. However, I do disagree with the gentleman you just had on so many different levels. I used to be a paramedic in the city of Boston, Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
You take away abortions and you make them illegal, those abortions are going to end up in alleyways with coat hangers. I've seen it, and I've treated patients with that who are bleeding out, and one of them died on us.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, this gentleman seems to think that a happily married couple, the male is going to go out and he's going to forge a new life for everybody, and the wife is going to stay home. I don't know anybody, and I'm middle class, I don't know anybody where one parent stays home anymore. You can't afford it.
Well,
I'm paying $8 for a dozen of eggs.
Well,
So, I understand where you're coming from. I really understand that. But there has to be a better way.
Well, the better way is to preserve life. And you talk about, women perhaps dying with the coat hangers that you saw one. Keep in mind that there are thousands of babies, many thousands that are dying every single day. Brother Harden, if you want to respond to the caller here.
No, I appreciate Mike's sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is that abortion procedures really haven't changed that much since it's been legalized. It's actually what's happened is, it went from the back alley to Main Street. That's basically all that's happened. And abortion, I was delivered at the hands of an abortionist named Neville Sender in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And, he's the one that was said, to abort a child is to perforate a uterus, basically meaning it's very dangerous and, we're going to, cause lots of damage. And he does, and they do. And that's one of the reasons why the abortion industry is fraught with lawsuits for medical malpractice.
Mm-hmm.
And there should be more. They should actually be run out of business for the medical malpractice. The worst doctors always end up being the ones at the bottom of the class, can't do anything else and wouldn't be hired by anybody else, so they have to be, they have to do the worst things, which is abortion. So, with respect to, the marriage and childbearing, look, I've got 10 kids and my wife stays home, and I have a wage of very moderate wage as a nonprofit leader. And, it can be done. If you can pinch your pennies. We know for a fact that, look, there's only one. Life always comes from self-sacrifice. It's always been that way. Motherhood is a demonstration of life issuing from self-sacrifice. Christ is a demonstration of life issuing from self-sacrifice. We need to make sure that people understand that standard of living is not the goal. The goal is reflecting the glory of God to Him and back to each other through love.
Mike, thank you for your call. I wish we had more time to interact, but we've got 4 minutes left and lots of callers lined up. But we thank you for making your main points with us here today. Dave is next in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. You're on the air.
Yeah, very good. A couple points. I want to bring up the name Edwin Bernays. That was Freud's nephew. And he was utilized by the factions that are trying to topple nations to get women out in the workforce to increase smoking for women and also drinking. Are you aware of that?
Okay, let's get to our point of abortion here, Dave.
Okay. It's related to the whole point of getting women out of the house and empowering them in this idea that they're going to be in somehow having a better life, and that's never been the case.
Thank you so much for raising that issue. Any response here, Brother Jim?
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem. One of the reasons that women are tempted to have abortions when they face an unplanned pregnancy is because of a standard of living. You can either have this. The narrative is you can either have this baby and be destitute for the rest of your life, or you can have an abortion and all your wildest dreams will come true. But there is a third narrative that actually is more true, which is you can have this baby and have a fulfilling life. There is no easy life, and none of us are going to get out of this life with just pure ease. But look, we've got to help women understand the third narrative is possible. You can have this baby and continue relationships and continue your education, even continue your career.
Let's go to Michael in Phoenix, Arizona. Michael, you're on the air.
Hello, I had a question. When a woman has a miscarriage, it's not called an abortion. It's called a miscarriage. The pregnancy is not carried to term. It's taken either by nature or, if you want to say God, you could say God. How does that square with somebody else making a determination along the same line?
Okay.
That pregnancy should not go forward, though it is called a miscarriage and not an abortion.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, the definition of an abortion is the intentional ending of or separating a healthy child from a healthy mother for the purpose of ending the life of the child. Miscarriage, as you pointed out, is, essentially for whatever reason, the child just doesn't survive, and there's a separation between the mother and child because the child has died. There's a difference there. One is intentional, one is unintentional.
Thank you, Michael. Samuel is next from Wisconsin. Samuel, you're on the air.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I think you can talk about a great contradiction where people are pro-abortion but anti-death penalty. We're in the time where good is evil and evil is good. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess the point with all that is, here we sanction the killing of innocent human life and yet protect that life which is not innocent, those who have committed horrendous crimes in that regard. The great contradiction there, Brother Harden.
Yeah, it is. In fact, I think one of the problems is that people are conflating, individual moral ethic that Jesus requires us to be radically sacrificial for our neighbor, and yet there's another ethic that the Bible describes for government. Government is an agent of justice. It does not bear the sword for nothing.
Yeah, thank you for the call. We have run out of time, friends. We are not able to take any more phone calls. The website for our guest is CompassCareCommunity.com. That's CompassCareCommunity.com. Brother Harden, thank you for joining us here today. A very important issue, and it's not going away. We must be more active than ever.
My pleasure. It's such an honor to be with you and have these very important conversations. It's not easy, and sometimes it can be sound a bit nasty, but these are the most important things to talk about.
Indeed. And friends, remember that we're knit together in our mother's womb. It's God who is the author of life, and let's respect that life that God has given to us. Troubling times, friends. Make sure you're praying for our nation. Be praying regarding the judicial tyranny that we're seeing exhibited before us as well. Thank you so much for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Take Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.